So this is the new DJI FPV drone, and if you're thinking about buying one of these, then you may be considering some of your other options. I've got a couple of drones here that I think you should be considering if you're thinking about going with the DJI FPV drone. And the first is a standard FPV drone. This is a DJI FPV drone. It's got the DJI Air Unit, does some really awesome footage, and is a little bit more maneuverable. Then there's this. This is the DJI Mavic Air 2. And actually, this even has an FPV mode, and it's gonna get some pretty awesome footage. So this also is a pretty unique tool, and it's kind of a combination or sits somewhere in between these two drones. So really, which one is best for you? Let's take a closer look. First, let's start by talking about this FPV drone. And it's not a typical FPV drone that you've really ever flown before, if it's something you've flown before. It has a gimbal, a one-axis gimbal. It does have a 4K camera, shoots 4K 60, and it's stabilized. The video feed coming out of this thing is crystal clear. Now, when DJI introduced their new digital FPV system, it was a game changer, and this takes that up a whole nother level. It's fast. You can fly it in manual mode or acro mode, but it also has a stabilized mode, so you can fly this thing much like you would a Mavic. But you can also flip a switch, and this thing will cruise at about 90 miles an hour. So the question is, should you opt for the DJI FPV drone, or is one of these drones a better tool for the job? And really, you have to kind of think about what is it that you're trying to do. If you want to fly far and just kind of see things as they are, maybe do some flips and rolls, maybe do some swoops down mountaintops, this is a pretty good drone for that. Again, the picture coming out of those goggles is pretty fantastic. You get good range, you get a good stick feel, and it's kind of a jack of all trades. All right, so I'm going to spend some time looking at the camera quality here on this DJI FPV drone. You can kind of compare it to the Mavic and the GoPro, and we're shooting all of them in 4K. This is 4K 60, and I'm starting out in normal mode. Now, I'm going to fly all three of these drones in angle mode, even though I don't normally do that with the other FPV drone. I just kind of wanted to show you that you can do that and kind of how it would compare, because I think in angle mode is actually the least stable, or it gets the least pleasing footage if you ask me. I kind of like the manual or acro movements better. It just seems a little bit more cinematic. So here again, this is normal mode. I'm going to bump it into sport mode so you can see the gimbal's going to move a little bit more. It's going to be a little bit twitchier. It's going to be a little bit faster. You know, flying low over the ground makes everything look a little bit faster, but this thing does haul in sport mode. And I do have electronic image stabilization turned on, and I have the distortion correction enabled. That isn't the case. That isn't what you're seeing in the goggles, but you can kind of change some of the settings if you like. But you can see in sport mode, it's definitely quick and it's moving. But the camera is pretty darn nice. Now, one thing you can do with this camera is actually angle it down, and that's not something you can do with a traditional FPV drone. Now, you do really kind of need a spotter to do this. You can make sure you have an eye on the drone, but it is kind of a neat feature, and yeah, you can even angle it down a little bit more. Now, of course, yes, you can fly acro, and like I said, I think you get better movements, better just kind of transitions. The rates on this, as you see when I flip and roll, they're pretty slow. So it's kind of, I don't know, maybe that's better for cinematic footage. Here I go do another roll. It's not quite as snappy or as quick. You'll see me do that with the race drone. Here I am. I'm going to actually throw it upside down and hit the brake, and you can see it actually is going to stop and then hover. Pretty cool. Here it comes. I'm going to get upside down. Just a second, get my bearings out in the middle of the field, upside down, brake, hover. That's cool. But I can get some of that footage from a drone like this. And actually, I flew this drone in angle mode, right? I never really do that. I generally fly this thing in acro mode where I can do those flips and rolls and power dives and stuff like that, split S's, Not that I'm really good at that, but I can. And I got my GoPro Hero 8 on here. This is going to get me some really nice stabilized footage. But I feel like I have more control with this. Now, I actually flipped a switch and flew this in angle mode because, you know, if you're a beginner and you're thinking, well, I don't really want to fly Acro, this DJI drone gives me the option of flying in angle or acro mode. Well, guess what? You can do it with one of these as well. I could even add a GPS unit to this to help bring it home. Now, I'm not going to get the 10, 11, 12 minute flight times that I could with the DJI drone. I'm probably getting, you know, maybe 6 minutes if I'm lucky.
All right, so I feel more comfortable flying this. I've obviously flown this a few more times, but even in angle mode, which I don't know that I've ever flown this in angle mode before with the goggles. It performs how I know it would, right? So I don't have the yaw and the roll mixed together. Now I know I can turn that off on the DJI drone, but you know, it's there. It's interesting, right? But this is just, and this is, it's lighter, it's more powerful. Like I can punch out if I need to. Ooh, my goggle batteries are low, but yeah, so I feel more comfortable if I, was to crash. I don't feel like it would break.
But this thing is just more precise. I just feel more comfortable flying this, even in angle mode, and I don't have that GPS stability. Okay, so that brings us to this guy, the DJI Mavic Air 2, and I really do like this drone. It's been a lot of fun to fly, but it's definitely a different tool. It certainly isn't really much like this at all, but when I first flew this DJI drone line of sight, this FPV drone, it reminded me a whole lot of this Mavic. So this Mavic is really a flying camera. That's what it is. This gimbal does a great job of stabilizing footage, but there is a mode called FPV mode. So you can kind of do some of those swoops and not quite rolls, but you get some of that footage that's a little bit more cinematic where you kind of see the horizon tilt. You can do that with this drone. Now, it takes some practice to kind of get good at that, to kind of mimic some of that acro stick movement, but it does have that feature if you want to give it a try. Now, when I'm talking about cameras, I'm gonna have to say this is probably the best of the three options. Now, yeah, you can put whatever camera you want probably on your FPV drone, but again, that's kind of a risk because these things, they tend to crash. Whereas this obstacle avoidance is built in. I really feel pretty safe flying this thing because it is super stable. Now, it isn't nearly as fast as either of those drones, but again, that's not what this thing was built for. I can always speed up my footage in post if I wanted to. This is a nice drone to just kind of fly slow, and you can get some pretty cool swoopy movements, just kind of low cruising with a DJI Mavic Air 2. All right, so back to this guy. Now, when we're talking about this, and yeah, it does have obstacle avoidance. I don't know if I'd call it avoidance. It's just like, hey, obstacles are there. Flashing lights will slow down if you're in the really slow mode. But if you're flying this thing fast, that's not even going to factor in. This drone, the combo kit is $1,300. That is not cheap. And, I was just really nervous to fly this thing because it's plastic. If I look at some of my FPV quads, I got this nice carbon fiber frame. I've crashed this thing a whole bunch. It's still in one piece. I have not crashed this. I don't want to crash this because that makes me super nervous. So, do I want this if I'm going to go freestyle ripping? I don't know. The camera's really pretty nice, but I could also get a pretty nice camera on one of these quads. If I'm going to rip around, I'm going to do something like this. And is it going to cost me $1,300? Well, let's break down the price. So an FPV drone like this, if I want the HD system from DJI, that's going to cost me $350 or more. Now I could go with an analog drone for about $200. I'm still going to need to buy a remote control, and I can get a decent one like the Radiomaster TX16 for less than $200. I still got to buy some batteries and a charger. Some of that, maybe that could cost me $80, $100. And if I want the digital system, I need the DJI goggles, and those are going to be $570. That puts me at about $1,200 to buy this drone, and that's $100 cheaper than this. Now that's not counting the GoPro. Now depending on what GoPro you want, we use the Hero 8, it's pretty solid. It's gonna cost you about $300 or so. That puts me in the $1,500 range to build a good cinematic FPV quad with the digital system. But I can absolutely do it a lot cheaper. If I go the analog route, I spend $200 on the drone. I can buy a cheaper pair of goggles for about $100. Again, I don't have to spend $200 on a remote. I can get a pretty good one for about $100. And I buy a cheaper charger and a couple of batteries for $50. I'm in at about $450. Now I can add that $300 GoPro. I'm at $750 for a setup like this, flying analog. Or I can just buy this Mavic Air 2 for $800 and it comes with everything that I need. Now, there is no goggle option for this thing, so that's kind of a bummer, but you know, it kind of depends. Some people get nauseous wearing those goggles on their face, so it is nice to be able to see the screen in front of you. So at the end of the day, you kind of have to figure out what is the purpose of your flying and what really is important to you. You know, this is a great, fun, easy way to get into FPV. I don't have to worry about binding and beta flight and all that. That does come with one of these. So, you know, if you want the easiest entry into FPV with a good camera, everything set up for you, this is the way to go. If you want a little bit more flexibility, I'd probably recommend building your own or buying your setup and kind of putting your components together. You know, as a freestyle FPV or racer, if that's really what you want to get into, you want something like this. But at the end of the day, if you're just really trying to get excellent aerial footage, something like this Mavic Air is probably the best tool for you. Now, yes, you can put this in sport mode and fly fast, and yes, you can fly it FPV in FPV mode, but it is best suited as just a tool to capture really good pictures and video. So, which tool is best for you? Only you can decide. Hopefully this was helpful. If it was, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't checked us out on halfchrome.com, make sure you do so. And we also have a Patreon. We give a drone away once a month to a lucky subscriber. So check that out in the video description down below. Hey, good luck and happy flying.